Welcome to the Tools for Traders. This is Tuesday evening, January the 23rd of 2024. Tonight's session will be on Pattern Finder. Take it, Ripper.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Today is hopefully going to be one of the shorter sessions we've had. It seems we've been doing pretty good at running over past our time limit. But this one, hopefully we're going to keep it within the hour. Tonight we're going to be talking about the Pattern Finder. And the majority of the settings for the Pattern Finder are the same as what was found in the chart tool for describing to the Pattern Finder what constitutes an acceptable pattern. So we're not going to cover those settings. We're just going to go and cover the settings which are unique to the Pattern Finder. Now, the Pattern Finder was created to find sequences of our four supply and demand patterns. Now, we all know what the four patterns are. You know, the rally-based rally, the drop-based drop, the rally-based drop, the drop-based rally. So this tool was created to find sequences of those. It was initially intended as a research tool, but it started finding some valuable things and became useful actually as a trading tool. So it was added to the package. Now, the Pattern Finder is intended to be used in a radar screen or with the TradeStation scanner. Most folks use it in the radar screen. And when you're using it in the radar screen, you're essentially using it to monitor the particular markets that you've selected on the particular intervals you've selected. And then to let you know when a particular sequence of the four supply and demand patterns occurs. Now, it will identify the last instance of the sequence. So if you have multiple sequences occur on a particular market, it's only going to show you the last such sequence to occur, because that's the one that's most likely to still be usable or potentially tradable. Now, what do we mean by a sequence? Well, a sequence can be as simple as searching for one of the four supply and demand patterns. You know, let's say a rally-based rally. Or it can be quite complex, where you're searching for a whole series of things. Just to give you an example, let's say you want to start by looking for a drop-based drop. Then you want to look for a drop-based rally, followed by a rally-based drop, followed by a drop-based rally, and then a rally-based rally. Anyone want to take a guess what that looks like? That looks like a W most of the time, I should say. So you can go and have it look for an extended sequence of these. And the limit on the sequence is really, you know, the limit of the largest string that you can input to TradeStation for a setting. Now, in addition to having it look for a sequence like that, you can also go and set limits on how far apart the different items in a sequence can be. So in the sequence I specified before, where we were trying to find a W, and we started out with a drop-based drop. We could say that we want to find the drop-based rally within 40 candles. And if it's more than 40 candles away, we're not interested. And then for the next leg, from the drop-based rally up to the rally-based rally, giving us the middle of the W, you could say you want to see that within 30 candles. And then the next leg down from the rally-based drop to the drop-based rally, we could say we want to see that within 30 candles. And then we want to see the final one, the drop-based rally to the rally-based rally. We want to see that within 20 candles, let's say, for the sake of argument. So you can set limits like that also. Now, the pattern supports all of the rules and settings used by the chart tool for defining what constitutes an acceptable pattern. And it's important that you keep your pattern finder in sync with what you're using for your chart tool, so that if the pattern finder actually finds something and you go to look for it on your chart, you want the chart finder using the same settings so you actually have a chance to see what the pattern finder actually found. Now, when we actually go and do this live, there's a couple settings you can play with on the chart tool, which can help you to see what the pattern finder is seeing. Another thing to keep in mind is that the pattern finder literally just finds patterns and sequences of patterns. It doesn't check the patterns to see if they've been broken yet. You know, for instance, let's say it's a demand pattern. It doesn't check to see if prices closed below that pattern and the pattern is broken. It's just looking for the patterns. Now, to help keep your pattern finder in sync with the chart tool, the pattern finder is capable of using OSF files created for the chart tool. And it's able to go in to those OSF files and pull out the settings which are applicable to itself, while ignoring the ones that are unique to the chart tool and don't apply to it. So by using OSF files, you can make keeping your pattern finder in sync with the chart tool a lot easier. And that way, when they're looking at the same markets, they're using the same settings. So let's go see what this actually looks like. Okay. So here we have a radar screen, and it has the pattern finder in it. And we have a bunch of symbols on different intervals. And we can see that the pattern finder has multiple outputs. Now, not all of these outputs are intended for use in a radar screen. The first column here underneath the pattern finder is called pattern found. This is something that's actually for use in the TradeStation scanner. In the radar screen, we have the two other columns, the demand pattern found or the supply pattern found. And so it's easy for us as humans to just be able to look across and see what kind of a pattern was found. We don't need another setting to tell us that a pattern was found. We can see that we're getting a pattern date, a pattern time, and then either demand pattern found or supply pattern found will show up. But when you're setting up a scan in the TradeStation scanner, you have to, if you want your scan to be able to pick up either a demand pattern or a supply pattern, you can do that using the pattern found output. That's what it's there for. Otherwise, you end up having to put the pattern finder twice in the scan, or you end up having to rely on something that's not obvious, like checking to see if you got a pattern time output, which you should get regardless of whether it's a demand pattern or supply pattern. But that's, like I said, not particularly obvious, it's a lot easier to have, the pattern found output and to use that. And that way, when you come back to your scan setup later, it's pretty obvious as to what you were doing, as opposed to if you come back, much later and you don't remember and you're wondering why you are looking at for a pattern date. It's far less confusing. I'll put it to you that way. So that's why pattern found is there. Now, the radar screen has the ability to hide columns you don't want. So it's easy to go in there and to just hide the pattern found column in the radar screen. And you can also hide other columns you may not be interested in, such as the total candles processed. When you set up the pattern finder, you have to tell it how far back it's going to go looking for patterns. And there are times when a row in the radar screen can get stuck. That's probably the best way to put it. And so by looking at the total candles processed, if you see something that's really abnormal and is below what you set for the minimum distance to go back looking for patterns, then you can tell that you have a row that's stuck and needs to be restarted in essence. And if you want to restart it, there's a couple ways you can do that. If you do something like a Control R, though, the Control R will restart that row, but it will also restart every other row in the radar screen and every other chart window or radar screen you have open. So depending on what you've got open, that could be quite a while before your system comes back and everything is back up to where you were before. So in the tool itself, we have something called Flipper. Flipper doesn't do anything. Its sole purpose is to make TradeStation think you've changed a setting. And you can use that to restart a single row within a radar screen and not having to restart the world, so to speak. So that can be quite useful. And we'll take a look at that when we actually go live and play. So once you're sure your radar screen has processed everything it should, you can then go and hide the total candles processed field as well. So the total candles processed and the pattern found field are the ones that are most often hidden when dealing with the pattern finder. And again, the pattern found, that output is primarily targeted at the TradeStation scanner. So let's go take a look at some of the settings here. There's really not a lot for the pattern finder. The first group of settings here are all looking for a specific one of the four supply and demand patterns. So these are really shortcuts, for going in and setting up a search string for just a single pattern. You can have the tool search for multiple of these or all four of them at the same time if you wish. That's entirely up to you. But this is a quick and easy way to enable that. If you're using the actual custom search string to do this, you can only do one of them at a time. So that's why these are here. You can have the tool search for all of them simultaneously if you so wish. Now, the next group down here, we're looking for compound patterns. And in this particular case, there are two compound patterns that we are interested in. And they occur often enough to where we made a special entry in the tool for them. And again, by having them this way, you can search for both of them simultaneously, potentially in conjunction with individual patterns should you have a desire to do so. So the first of these patterns is the rally-based drop followed by the drop-based drop. And so here we have price changing direction. Price was moving up, now it's moving down. And we have the reversal pattern, which is the rally-based drop, followed by a continuation pattern, which is the drop-based drop. And so we most often see this when we're getting a significant change in direction that's going to last for a period of time. Now, the next setting after that is the separation. And this is the maximum number of candles that may appear between the two patterns in the sequence. So you can have a rally-based drop, and by default, you can have no more than 4 candles before you have to have the leg in of the drop-based drop. If it's more than 4 candles, it's not going to qualify as the compound pattern. Similarly, the next one down is our reversal for going the other way. Price is moving down, and now it's going to go up. So the reversal pattern is the drop-based rally, and that's followed very closely by the continuation pattern, which is the rally-based rally. And as before, we're not going to allow more than 4 candles to occur between the two. Now, most of the time when you see these compound patterns occur, they occur very close together, and often the leg out of one may be the leg in of the second one. But the defaults do allow you to have 4 candles between them and yet still count it as a valid compound pattern. And again, depending on your market, you can back test to see what gives you the best results, and then you can adjust those values accordingly. Now, the next 2 settings allow you to create your own compound patterns to search for. And the way you specify what it is you want to search for, you're going to basically enter a string in quotes. And you can see by default, there's an empty string there. Basically, it's 2 double quotes side by side. So you're going to want to insert your string in there between the double quotes. And you're going to specify the patterns and the maximum separation between the patterns. So as you can see in the example here, we have the drop-based drop, we have a comma, we have 40 and a comma, and then we have our next pattern. So the initial pattern in the sequence is going to be a drop-based drop. The next pattern in the sequence is a drop-based rally, and we can't have more than 40 candles between them. And we can continue this and add on more patterns. So after the drop-based rally, we're going to allow a maximum of 30 candles, and we want to have found a rally-based drop within that limit. After the rally-based drop, we're going to look for a drop-based rally, and we don't want to have more than 30 candles between them. The drop-based rally, after that, we're looking for a rally-based rally, and we want to see that within 40 candles. And since the rally-based rally is the end of the sequence, we don't have to specify a max separation value after that. So the tool is going to go through looking for patterns that meet the requirements. And again, those requirements come from the same settings that we use in the chart tool to specify what is an acceptable pattern. So we have to have a sequence of acceptable patterns. Now, the next setting here, strict custom search, what that means is when you're out, or when the tool is out looking for this sequence, we take our example. Let's say he's found a drop-based drop, then he's found a drop-based rally, then he finds a rally-based drop. But now he finds a drop-based drop. Well, that is not what we're looking for at this point in time. We're looking for a drop-based rally here, right? So if strict custom search is true, that would break the sequence, and we'd have to start the search again, from the point where the sequence was broken. If strict custom search is false, then we will ignore other patterns that we find that are not within the search sequence. And our sequence is violated then when we do not find what we're looking for within the number of candles, the limit on the number of candles from the previous item we found. So in our case here, where we found the drop-based drop, we found the drop-based rally, we found the rally-based drop, but then we found a drop-based drop. Well, if we have not yet exceeded the limit of 30 candles between the rally-based drop and what we're looking for, if strict custom search is false, we will ignore the drop-based drop pattern we just found, and we'll continue looking. And if we can find a drop-based rally and we're still within 30 candles of the rally-based drop, then we'll still consider it a match and keep going. So that's the difference between the strict search being true and the strict search being false. So with the strict search is true, the minute we find a pattern that's not part of our sequence, the sequence is broken and we have to start again trying to match our sequence. If the strict search is false and we run into a pattern that's not in our sequence, but we have not exhausted the number of candles we're allowed to have between the items in our sequence, then we can ignore the spurious pattern and continue looking for the one in the sequence. And only when we have exceeded the number of candles we're allowed to have between the prior pattern in the sequence and the one we're looking for, only then can we declare the sequence broken and have to start searching again. So I hope that made sense.
Yes.
Okay, whoops. I got a little, I'll have to fix this in the slide deck here. That should not be that. All right, so let's go and actually play now and take a look and see what we can see when playing with this particular tool. Okay, so here we have a radar screen to play with. Let's see, we got a bunch of stuff in here already. It's just kind of a mix of stuff. We've got the NASDAQ 100 index along with a few other random things thrown in here. Some things may be in here more than once. Well, let's go in here and look at the settings. First, let's go in here and look at how to hide columns. So the pattern found column, again, that's for the TradeStation scanner, so we can hide it here. So I'm going to click on right mouse click on that, bring up the context menu. I'm going to go under studies, and then I'm going to go to show hide plots. And that's going to list all the columns that are being put out by the pattern finder. And the first one is pattern found, so I'm just going to uncheck that, and poof, it's gone. So that'll give us back some screen real estate that we can use for other things. Similarly, if we're not having any issues with, let's scroll down here and see, we're not having issues with rows getting stuck. Okay, that's interesting. Since I used a TradeStation symbol list to create this, there was a bad symbol in there. But otherwise, it looks like everything is okay. We don't have any stuck rows. A stuck row usually stands out because the value will be a lot less than all the others. So we can go in here and hide the total candles processed. So again, I'll click on the top of that column. I'll come over here to show hide plots, and I will uncheck total candles processed. And now we have the pattern finder pared down to its essentials. Now, if I come up here and put my cursor over the name of the indicator and I right mouse click, we can go in and set what's essentially the defaults for this indicator for all entries in our radar screen. Now, the settings here will become the defaults, but you can go in and override these settings on a row by row basis. So again, here we have the searches for individual patterns. If you're running the chart tool, that's kind of superfluous, but it's there in case people need it. The ones that we're really interested in is going to be the compound patterns. So I've turned on the first of our compound patterns, the rally-based drop, followed by the drop-based drop. And I've left it at the default here, which is the a maximum of 4 candles separating the two patterns in the sequence. And I've turned on the compound pattern, drop-based rally, rally-based rally. And again, we're going to allow a maximum of 4 candles between them. And then over here, I've got a custom pattern in here. This is very similar to the custom pattern that we were looking for as an example. in the slides. I don't expect to find many of these, if any, but we'll see what happens. You never know. And I have the strict custom search set to true. Now the rest of the settings here are all at the defaults. I haven't changed anything there except for Flipper. And this is the setting Flipper that we were talking about before, which does absolutely nothing. And its purpose in life is to give you something that you can change to trick TradeStation into restarting the indicator, or in the case of the radar screen, restarting that row. It'll restart that single row in the radar screen. Although, of course, if we do this here as a global default, then, of course, it'll affect everybody. But if you go in on the specific row, this gives you a way to reset that specific row. Now, again, everything here is going to become the defaults for every row in the radar screen. And we'll look at changing them on a row-by-row basis here in a moment. So you've got your standard OSF settings here. You tell it how to find OSF files for the chart tool and which ones to load. And then, of course, you can show the settings that are actually in use, so you can see what was pulled from those files. And then down here, we have all of the settings that the pattern finder has in common with the chart tool. So we're not going to go over these because we've already covered these for the chart tool in one of the prior lessons. But you can see there's quite a few of these. And this is one of the reasons why using OSF files to keep your settings in sync between the pattern finder and the chart tool is, generally speaking, the way to go. So we have our defaults now, and this is going to apply to every row in the radar screen which has a symbol in it. Now, if you want to change the settings for a specific row, typically what you're going to do is you usually go into the first column underneath the pattern finder. And if you right click and you go under studies and TradeStation's cooperating, you'll actually end up with two options here to allow you to either set the global settings or the default settings for everybody, or go into the settings specific for this row. Now, sometimes TradeStation's a little uncooperative. Sometimes you have to play around. You can see this time we were under the second column underneath the pattern finder. And we can see the two choices here are grayed out. But the first choice is for this specific row, and then the second choice is, again, for the defaults for all rows. And TradeStation is just going to be uncooperative. There we go. Now we finally gave it to us. So sometimes you got to play around a little bit until he gives it to you. But at this point here, you can see the first entry is to edit the pattern finder settings for SPY. And that is specifically for this row in the radar screen. So we can have different settings for the pattern finder for this row if we wanted to. And just for the heck of it, we'll go and we'll change something here. Let's go in, we'll change the the max separation values here just to make a change and no other reason. And you can see that that row went blank and then it came back after he found what he was looking for. Now, since we have changed those settings, if we go back to change the defaults for all the settings, for all the rows, we'll notice something interesting there. If you look here, you can see that there's no value listed for the max separation for either max separation. The value is blank. That's how you can tell that somewhere in the radar screen you have an override in place for that setting. And if I go in and change this now, here, it will change it for all rows in the radar screen, and it will undo my local change. So we did that on the SPY on the 60-minute interval. If I go in here and I change this to 4, it will change my settings for SPY on the 60-minute interval and put those back to 4. If I don't want to change those, I just leave these alone. And I can change something else. And those settings will all be updated. But the ones I didn't change will not be affected. So whenever you see this, and you're setting the defaults for the radar screen, you know that there are some rows in the radar screen which have been customized. And these particular settings that have the blanks are the ones that have been customized in some of those rows. So important thing to know there.
Question.
Yeah.
When the OSF files, you change something down in the lower level, the OSF from the default, will the same thing be true there?
Well, the answer is that with the OSF files, let's go down here. If you're loading an OSF file in here, you're changing what the default is, in essence.
Right.
And that's happening at a lower level, so TradeStation's not going to recognize that. TradeStation is just going to recognize when this string here has been changed.
Okay.
Okay, so he's not going to know what has taken place with the OSF files.
Well, if you have, say, on SPY, you went in and changed your leg out strength to, I think default's 1.25.
Yeah. Right.
If you change the 60-minute to 1.5, would the default disappear?
No. Because that's taking place in an OSF file, the entry.
No, I'm saying if you change it on the SPY 60.
Okay, so you're talking about actually changing the entry. So the actual string here has been changed.
Yes.
Yes, that should get noticed. And that should show as blank when you're looking at the default settings for the whole radar screen.
Okay, that's what I was asking.
Yeah, so a manual override will be noticed, but a change due to an OSF file will not. TradeStation is just going to notice when you change the actual entry in the value column here. So he is completely unaware of changes that are being made due to OSF files. Very good question. So I hope that's clear. Okay, so we can see the output here. And what we're getting here is the date and timestamp from the leg out of the pattern that was found. Now, you'll notice that on some of these, we have a date and we have a timestamp, but we do not have a demand pattern found or a supply pattern found set. And that's because this is a match of the custom pattern, the custom sequence that we entered. And the tool doesn't know if the custom sequence is a supply sequence or a demand sequence. So when he gets a match on that, you're not going to get a characterization of what kind of a pattern it is, because he doesn't know if it was a demand sequence or a supply sequence. But you will get out the date and the timestamp, and that would be for the last pattern in the sequence, the leg out of the last pattern in the sequence. Now for these others, we had turned on our compound patterns. We had looking for our basically a reversal pattern followed by a continuation pattern. Since the tool knows what those are, it can characterize those. And so, you know, if we take this one right here, yes, on a 1597 tick chart, demand pattern was found. That means he found the drop base rally followed by the rally base rally, that compound pattern. And the tool knows that that is a demand pattern. So that's what we have here. And if we look at SPY on the 15-minute, this is where he found our custom pattern. But again, he doesn't know if that's a demand sequence or a supply sequence, so those are blank. Down here, Tesla on the 240, it's completely blank because he did not find a pattern. Now, how do we control how far back the tool goes to look? Well, that's a TradeStation setting. And we'll go into the studies, and this is another one that you can customize on a row-by-row basis within the radar screen. But I'm going to go into, again, our defaults for the radar screen. And I'm going to go to the General tab. And on the General tab, you'll notice down here near, I guess that's a little below halfway, there is a checkbox which should be marked that says load additional data for accumulative calculations. And then below that, it has additional bars to load. And you can see here, the default is 390. So what's going to happen is when the radar screen is first loading, it is going to want to load at least 50 candles before it's going to call the tool to run. And that's given from up here under maximum number of bars study will reference. And then he's going to load an additional 390. So he's going to go back 440 bars, 440 candles. And that's where you could think of each row in the radar screen as a chart without the graphics. That's where the chart for the row was going to start. And that's why when we had total candles processed, you had 440 for a lot of them. Some you had additional ones. But that's where that comes from. So if you want them to go back farther, you could increase this number here. And when we look at the trade finder, for instance, we'll see that we're actually going to want to make this number much larger. But when we're just looking for the patterns, and again, the tool is not going to be checking to see if the patterns have been broken or anything like that. It's just looking for the last instance of the pattern it was given to search for. We don't want to go back excessively because then it may find something that's, broken or not useful or not timely at the least. So the 390 is a reasonable starting point. And if you're not finding things, you can try going back further. Just be aware that, if you do find things going back further, they may have already been broken and are not usable. But this is how you control how far back the tool can go looking for patterns.
Question.
Yes.
Tesla 240, nothing was found.
Correct.
What if calculation is in progress, but not yet complete? How would you know?
Well, let's go in and unhide total candles processed.
Okay.
So we can see he's covered the 440 candles since the beginning of the chart. And he's waiting for the next candle to form. And when that does, you'll see that go up to 441. So if this number was less than 440, you would know that that row was stuck. And he has not processed all of the candles. And that's when you would go in and use Flipper to try to get that row unstuck and making progress again. And so again, to use Flipper, we'd want to go into the settings for just this row. So I'm going to right mouse click on one of the cells in that row underneath the pattern finder. And we sometimes have to mess around to find the cell that TradeStation is going to let us in on, especially when you've got some cells hidden. There we go. And we can go into the settings for just this row. And then we can scroll down a little bit. We don't have to go that far. And there's Flipper. And we'll change Flipper. And then just that row will get restarted. And then you can get a chance to see if he finds anything. Since we're not loading a lot of data, it generally happens very quickly. It's not like the trade finder where we have to go through, a few thousand candles, because there we're looking for supply and demand zones. Here, we're just looking for patterns, and we're not checking to see if they're broken or anything. We're just trying to find a match for the sequence we were given. Now, you can take the radar screen and you can link it to a chart window. And in this case here, we've already got it linked to a chart window. And if it's linked to a chart window and you find something of interest, you can click on the symbol and the chart window will change to the same symbol and the same interval. Now, you may have to make sure it's loading the same amount of data. Now, the pattern finder is only looking at patterns that meet the requirements specified. So you may have other patterns there, but the pattern finder is not looking at them because they don't meet all the requirements that we have specified. Now, since the pattern finder is not looking at zones, it's not looking, to see if a pattern is a retest of an existing zone or anything like that. So we can set the chart tool up to help us find some of the patterns or sequences of patterns that the pattern finder is looking for. So what I did here is I went into the settings for the chart tool. Right now, there's a bunch of indicators on this chart, but the only one that's active is this specific chart tool here. I've turned off a couple things that we don't need for this exercise, like we don't need the curve or the CIC high or low. I do have some OSF files getting loaded, which are changing the font sizes and transparencies. It also changes the band creation method. I've set this back to band creation method 3 just to force it back to the default. But what I've done is I've come down here to keep broken bands, and I've turned on keep broken bands. So each band represents a pattern that was found to be acceptable and was turned into a supplier demand band. Now, the major reason why an acceptable pattern doesn't get turned into a supplier demand band is because it's a retest of an existing band. So to turn that off, to turn that check, that's part of the freshness checks, I went down to ignore overlapping bands, and I set that to true. So that means that the chart tool is not going to check to see if an accepted pattern is a retest of an existing supplier demand band, but it will just instead turn it into a supplier demand band. and that will create overlapping supply and demand bands. But that will help us to see all the patterns that are qualified and that met all of the requirements we specified for supply or demand patterns. And that will help us to find what the pattern finder is seeing, if it's not already obvious. So again, the big thing here is ignore overlapping bands and set to true, and keeping broken bands on the chart so we can see what's going on. And then you can turn off other things that get in the way. Let's see, what did we, I guess we just clicked on the first one here. So this is SPY on the 22nd at 12:05. So let's go down and find SPY on the 22nd at 12:05. That's going to be in this big mess over here. That was a supply pattern. So that means it has to be our supply compound pattern, because that's the only thing we've told it to search for, is the two compound patterns plus the custom pattern. So that means it's going to be a rally-based drop followed by a drop-based drop. And so we can go in here at 12:05. Let's go put a marker on the chart here. Find what 12:05 is. Is that 12:05? That's 12:10. There's 12. Let's make this somewhat more visible. Hopefully that's showing up over Zoom.
You might darken the color of the text. There you go. That's better.
Okay. All right, so let's go zoom in here and see what we can see. No pun intended. All right. So if we're working backwards, there's our drop-based drop. And then up here we have a rally-based drop. And so that is the pattern that we told it, or that's one of the patterns that we told it to look for. So hopefully everybody can see that here. This pattern here is a rally-based drop. It generated a zone. Since we're allowing overlapping zones, so we can see what the pattern finder sees. And then we have a drop-based drop here. That generated a zone. And again, we have it doing that to help us see what the pattern finder is seeing. So this one was fairly easy to see. It did meet the requirements that were set. Now this one here could be a lot more difficult because this is our custom pattern. Let's see, this was on the 8th at 14:45. All right. Let's make sure we have enough data loaded. I'm just going to. All right, so let's go back. We don't need this line anymore. Okay, so there. Okay, so this should be 1445. I marked that earlier when I was testing things. Okay, and if you remember, we were kind of looking for, what was it? It was a W pattern, right? So here we have the rally base rally at the end of it. So we come back down here. Here's the drop base rally. And again, we're working backwards. And we keep going backwards. Here's our rally base drop. Now you may question about these in here, but these did not meet our requirements for those patterns. So the pattern finder is not going to consider those. But this one did meet our requirements. And so with the mode that we have the chart tool in right now, it's going to draw a zone there. So before that, we wanted a drop base rally. We have that right here. And then right before that, we've got a drop base drop. And it made this little zone right here. We can zoom on that. So here's the drop base drop, right into the drop base rally, into the rally base drop. And then we don't get another qualifying pattern until we're all the way over here. And then this gives us the drop base rally. And then off and to the right somewhere, we had our rally base rally. So it found exactly what we asked it to, but it wasn't the picture perfect W we were looking for, shall we say? So that does show you, some of the limitations that you have on the tool, but the tool does find what was asked for. And we can go through and look at others if you'd like. That's up to you guys. But we can see we got tick charts here we can look at. We've got the time-based charts we looked at. Let's see if we have another one of these. There should be another one at least. I think when I was messing with this earlier, I think it was Google. Yeah. So something was found because we have a date and time here. Since it's not characterized as either demand or supply, that means it's our custom pattern. Let's go see if this one's any easier to pick out. So let's see. 12:15 on the 23rd. This should be marked. Yeah, this should be it right here. Yeah, that stands out much nicer. So here we had a qualified pattern, which gave us the rally base rally. Working backwards. Here was the next qualified pattern. And this was the drop base rally. And we start going up. The origin of this guy is next. This was our qualified rally base drop. And before him, we had the qualified drop-based rally. And then before him, we had a qualified drop-based drop. So sometimes you get these things that only a computer could love. Other times, you'll find what you're looking for. So as we find better ways to do things, we will continue to enhance the tool. But this is, I guess you could say, the state where we're at right now. I have no idea what would be another good one to look at. Oh, Meta. So if something was found on Meta, Meta's Facebook, right? If not, who cares? Close enough for government work. So this is 123 at 1020. This was characterized as supply. So right now, the only supply pattern we have it searching for is the rally-based drop, drop-based drop. So let's go see what we have at 1020. Okay, so here we have a drop-based drop pattern. And that is coming right after a rally-based drop. And it turns out that the leg out of the rally-based drop is the leg in for the drop-based drop. So that should be a strong configuration. And sure enough, you get a retest here, and the retest holds. So if you had the pattern finder running on Meta on a 5-minute interval, you would have gotten a warning about this pattern shortly after the pattern formed, which means that you had the opportunity then to possibly play this retest. And that's what you're after, really, with the pattern finder. You're trying to find these kind of situations and find them early enough so that when you get a retest, you can play the retest. The other thing you can use it for, again, is for back testing different patterns. So you can have it find those patterns, and then you can see how those patterns played out, and then develop these statistics. So in the future, if you see those patterns, you know what to expect. Any questions? You want to look at a couple more? What would you guys like?
I've got a couple of questions if nobody else does.
Okay.
Would it be possible to add candle number to the pattern finder?
I don't see why not.
I don't see any reason why it wouldn't. And
It's all a matter of code, right? It's just
yeah,
code.
I mean,
Code
it's
memory.
yeah. For that, adding it to that's probably one line of code. So
Yeah, it shouldn't be that bad.
and that way, if we could, well, it's 2 lines of code. You still got to plot it, but
yeah,
for it to display in the on the
to show.
chart.
Yeah, Yeah, as a column and all in the radar
Yeah.
screen. Yeah, you could certainly do that.
I think that would be a good benefit for because then you can go right straight to your chart and go find your candle number and voila, there you are.
Yeah. That would certainly be
Well,
something we can look at. If you put the
yeah,
if you put the candle number tool on the chart, then you've got the candle numbers available.
right.
Well, the real question though is,
Where's the chart gonna start?
right, that's the key with candle numbers. Because TradeStation starts at the beginning of the chart, wherever that happens to be. And we've already seen issues with that on like tick charts or share bar charts where,
Right.
you know, you have a whole group of people in the room, you all tell them at the same time, hit the button, you know, and yet
Yeah.
everybody ended up with slightly different numbers.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
something, I mean,
probably.
that's something we can try and see what happens. On a time-based
Yeah.
chart, it may be okay. Although really the issue is going to be that the chart for the pattern finder is by default going to be starting 440 candles back,
Right.
whereas your chart with the chart tool may be going back, you know, 2,000 or 5,000.
Right. The next question, if you send settings from the chart and I haven't looked yet, is there receive settings in the
pattern finder?
Pattern finder?
No.
Okay.
No.
So you have to use an OSF file.
Yeah, you have to use an OSF file.
Okay. Just a thought.
Although that is an interesting idea, though, to be absolutely honest. And that is something that could potentially be added because the way settings are sent, the sender actually packages them up as an OSF file. And then he puts the resulting OSF file into the TradeStation Global Dictionary under the name that he was given. And then the sender will go out, excuse me, not the sender, the receiver. The receiver goes out and he registers with that dictionary, so he'll get notified if that dictionary is changed. And he's going to look in that dictionary for those OSF files, and he's going to pull those out as project OSF files so that if the user wants, they can also have a personal OSF file layered on top.
Yeah.
So since it's still an OSF file, it's just a matter of changing where he looks for it.
Sure.
So
okay.
It could be possible to have him do that. We'd have to look and see.
Just a thought for future revisions.
Yeah. No. That's actually a very interesting idea. That's a very good idea.
It might make it simpler to keep them synced.
Yeah, exactly. You know, because then you could actually have him going out there. If you have a chart that's opened already and you have that guy sending, he'll go and use that. And if he doesn't find that, then he would go look at the personal OSF files like he would normally.
Sure.
So that's a possibility. I can go and look at that and see what we can do. I don't think we can get that in on this beta cycle, but that is something we can do in the future and look at that.
Yeah.
Question.
Go for it.
What is the limiting factor on the combination of the four zone elements that the pattern finder can find?
So you're talking about how many of them can you string together in a sequence?
Yes.
Basically, the limit is how big a string can TradeStation handle for a setting.
Which I think we determined was 256
Yeah,
characters.
it's at least 256. So that's a lot of supply and demand patterns in that sequence. So you could have quite a few.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
70
we tried.
the maximum. It's 70 the maximum space between one pattern and the next.
Actually, I think it's open-ended as far as the tool is concerned. You can specify whatever you want. The question is, at what point do you get in trouble with the TradeStation window size? The window is the number of candles that you're allowed to see at once on the chart. TradeStation doesn't give an indicator the entire chart. It only gives it a sliver of the chart. In some places, that's called a window onto the chart. And so by default, we have the window for the pattern finder set to 50 candles. I'd have to go and look it up to be honest. But I don't think he has to reference that many candles back. So you could probably specify a max separation that's greater than that without getting into trouble. I would suspect that you could probably, there probably really isn't a limit. Well, the limit would end up being, memory driven or something like that. But, with the size of the chart. But I don't
know
think
that
you have to
I know
specify.
when TradeStation is displaying indicators on the chart, if you go back too far past what's actually displayed on the window, your indicator disappears, even though part of it's on the window itself.
Yeah, well, what's happening there is, let's say, for instance, that the max bar's back setting, which is on the general tab. It's if we go and we look at the general tab, let me bring that up.
Wasn't it auto detect?
It could be set to auto detect, or it could be set to a fixed value. So like for the chart tool, I believe we have it set to 70 because the auto detect doesn't get it right. The chart tool is way too complex. See, so we have it set to 70. So that means that we get 70 candles at a time. We get the current candle plus the 69 candles before it whenever we get a new candle to process. And 70 candles is as far back as we can look. Now, we get around that in the chart tool, and we do this in the pattern finder as well, I'm sure. by actually saving items of interest to us, so that after they're no longer accessible in the window of candles we're given, we have that item saved, and we have its location saved, its date and time stamp saved, all that kind of stuff. And that way we can refer to stuff that happened well before. So that's how we get around the candle limitation. And I'm pretty sure we're doing the same thing with the pattern finder. And I don't think we should need to go back more than the 50 that we have it set to as a default here. So I don't think there's a limitation on the number of candles you can specify between members of a sequence. You know, so if you wanted to go in there and specify, yeah, we'll allow up to 5,000 candles, you know, between you know, a drop base drop and a drop base rally in your sequence, you can do that. You know what they say? Let's find out.
Oh man, you're getting on the far side.
Yeah, well, what's the worst that can happen, right?
Yeah, well, you know, we get toward the end of the recording.
Yeah, let's see here.
If it crashed TradeStation.
Yeah, we'll just edit it out, right? Yeah. So let's say here, we'll go, what, 300 candles?
Sure.
I'll do 400 candles here. Let's say another 300 here. Let's go for the gusto. We'll say 4,000. Now, all these numbers are bigger than the chart he's actually going to get. Okay, because back here on the general tab, he's only going to get 390 candles plus the 50 max bars back. So he's only going to get 440 candles when this starts, you know. So essentially, we're just making it unlimited distance between the different parts of this sequence, or nearly unlimited. So let's see what happens, right? What's the worst that can happen?
And if it finds a pattern before it gets all the way through there, then it should be just fine.
Yeah, exactly. If we go back to the top, those guys will get processed first. And they're coming right along. He found the one on SPY earlier, which was the custom pattern. So that hasn't changed. Yeah, so he's trucking along just fine.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd have to get a case where somehow you had 4,000 candles between two items in the sequence. Perhaps if you went and turned off the strict checking, you might be able to get that if you had a hell of a lot of data loaded on a chart, or in this case, the radar screen. But boy, your radar screen would be slower than molasses. And that would also limit the number of items you can have in the radar screen too, because all elements in the radar screen are handled by one process. And since TradeStation's 32-bit, that one process is 32-bit, and that limits the amount of memory that that process can access. And you can run it out of memory. I've done it. So have other folks here. So it worked here. Of course, that could just mean we didn't hit the magic condition that stops it, but either way, that the limit's pretty far out.
Very good.
So any other comments, questions, suggestions, observations, synonyms?
Very stable.
Knock on wood, right?
No questions, but I'm still here listening.
Okay.
Just saying.
All right. I guess then we're done if nobody has any other questions. And let's see, how long did it take us? Well, we still went over an hour.
Yeah.
Still
An hour
haven't
and
made
20
a-
minutes.
Hour and 20? Yeah.
But we didn't start the recording until probably 20 afterwards. We were talking about Zoom and some of the other things.
Well,